Hey, welcome to Good Grazing Makes Sense Rotational Grazing Edition. As always, we're brought to you by the Society for Range Management. And tonight we're doing something special, or today if you happen to be listening later on. We've got 3 guests from different parts of the country who do some sort of rotational grazing. I think we all have heard rotational grazing called many different things. It goes by a lot of names. In my mind, it has one objective, and that is to give the plants time to recover before their next grazing event. The panelists, please be thinking about that. I do want to know what your objective is when we start talking about your context, what rotational grazing does for you and why you did it. We'll start with just some introductions. Dan, you want to kick us off with a brief introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. I'm Dan Macon. I'm in California on the west slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains, kind of between Lake Tahoe and Yosemite. We have operated a sheep operation in the foothills for about 20 years. And in addition to my own operation, I work with a lot of producers up and down the Sierra foothills on a whole variety of range and livestock production issues. My context is that we're largely on annual rangelands and on shrublands here in the Sierra foothills. And so it's a different kind of forage and kind of a different growing calendar maybe than some other parts of the country, and changes the way we approach our rotational and targeted grazing programs.
We invited you here for several reasons, one of which is we want to make sure we talk about sheep today because I get a little cow-centric sometimes in my life and got to remember those small ruminants. Emery from Texas, can you give us a little background on you? What kind of operation do you run? What's the rainfall like where you're at, and what's the grass look like? What's your seasons look like?
This year has been an outstanding year. We've started extremely dry last fall and worked ourselves up to being extremely wet, and which is not necessarily all that good. Our gains were less than what we had hoped due to the fact that it rained more than we know. We run sheep and yearlings now and have had some goats. There's still some of them around here. We started out in the early 80s under Alan Savory running cows and calves. We moved over to steers and some heifers, and we did that because we wanted animal intensity on the main thing, and it's worked out well on that front. And we still are running steers, but now we've added sheep to it, and that's for the diversity, and that's turned out good too.
I recently interviewed John Locke, who described his area of Texas as basically an 11-month growing season, and that blew my mind. And it turns out it doesn't make it that much easier when you have that much water and that much growing. Roger, can you tell us about your operation and what your ecology is like up there?
Yeah. I'm Roger Enderland. My wife Betsy and I have Enderland Angus Ranch, so we're a Black Angus seed stock operation that focuses on a kind of a low input cow. So we're a little bit off the map as far as genetics. We're looking for a more moderate, efficient kind of cow for a grazing operation that can graze year round for the most part, which is the real challenge here. We're located in south central Montana, which is basically kind of straight north of Yellowstone Park. Billings is about 80 miles east of us, and Bozeman is probably 70 miles west of us. So that's the 2 bigger towns that people might recognize. And probably in about a 12-inch annual precipitation, try to graze cattle year round as much as possible. Do feed some hay when we get winter storms. But we're probably the other extreme from John Locke in that we'd have sometimes maybe even only a 6-week growing season. Maybe 2 months. Your frost-free days would probably be in the 140 to 170. There's a lot of variation year to year. So we've just done a lot of experimentation, small amount on our home place of base acres, and then a lot of lease ground. And that varies all the way from kind of flat prairie to about 7,500 feet in summer mountain grass.
Well, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Since we're on you, Roger, let's just start off with you. What was the impetus? What caused you to? Let me back up a second. When we're talking about rotational grazing, what does that mean to you? I see people rotationally overgrazing. I see people calling things rotation when it just means they're moving cows once in a while. What's your objective for rotationally grazing, and what made you decide to do it?
I think primarily probably trying to increase utilization might have been and increase production long term at the same time. And our term, I guess what we use on the ranch, we call it cell grazing, and it varies from frequent moves to longer term moves, but we try to do as short as we can kind of get to. One of the things that we struggle with is leased properties scattered all over, as well as a diverse landlord base, and so there's a lot of things we're working around. And then on top of that, there's a lot of different classes of livestock, whether it's yearling bulls, yearling heifers, bulls that are coming up for sale, or cows that are going to calve, or carrying a calf or have a calf outside. So there's calving season. There's just a lot of different things. And so I think some of our objectives cover a pretty broad scope of things, just because in some cases our objective has to be measured against partly what the landlord wanting to do or is allowing us to do. So that's kind of more of a context thing. But our primary thing that I think about is we're pretty low precipitation, pretty short growing season. We want to stockpile a lot of feed for the rest of the year. I think, our objective is to leave land rain ready, so that if we get precipitation, we want to try to capture as much of it as we can and have it protected.
I really like that term, rain ready. It's getting highlighted over here over and over again. I like that quite a bit. Emery, when we're talking about rotational grazing, do you have any specific terms you use? Rotational grazing, Roger calls it cell grazing. What's rotational grazing like for you?
Well, Freddie, we've gotten away from using the term rotational. It's time managed is what we think about, and what I like to talk about is we manage for growing the grass, not rotating across it. That's not what we look for. It's not so much rotational. If you get set on rotational, you get set on a time limit, same thing over and over again every year, and we're not on the same thing over and over again, especially now with the sheep. We don't want to be on any one grass plant or any plant weed, whether weeds are our most important asset. We feel like we don't want to be there more than 3 days, period. Here in this country, if it rains like you would expect it to rain, and it doesn't ever rain when you expect it to, but it's going to start back within 3 days. And if you're sitting here grazing it after 3 days, you're doing damage, and it's growing. If it's growing back and you're grazing it, you're hurting it. So that's, the first thing we look at is getting in here and getting off of it and not rotating, going with what's actually happening.
You're much less worried about the utilization of the plant and getting off and giving it time to recover.
Right. As soon as it starts growing, it has any growth we want to go on with the next one. It's a hard plan to follow, but that's what we try to follow.
Yeah, 3 days that's pretty tight. Are you making use of electric fence or anything?
Yes.
Or is it all large pasture moves?
Yeah. Well, we use a lot of polywire. But if you're in this country and you're growing grass back, and you expect to be growing grass back every day, you better be moving with it, not waiting on your rotational plan. It's time to go. And so that's what we look for.
In your part of the world, do you have to worry about getting back to it faster before it gets rank? And
that's where you come in with your numbers. And yes, we need to stay on it, but we need to stay off of it. It's a hard game to play. Right now, we can see we can be here too long, way too fast. We got grass now that's been here, and we should have been off 2 weeks ago or been by there 2 weeks ago. And it's just a hard game to play, but it's a game you got to play.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty fun game. I enjoy it. Emery, what made you decide to get into this business of moving your cattle more regularly? What was the game-changing moment for you, or has the ranch been doing that generationally?
No, I was the first one to start, and there's been a lot of them start and stop since I got started. But Savory came out, and I was just living on leased land all my life. My family was too, and we didn't own much. If anything, we Savory said you can double what you're doing if you do what I say. Well, you can if you do what he says, and it took some learning on my part to make that happen. It was true. I can double and I can triple, and we have done double and tripled and done more doing that. But it's a hard game to play, but I enjoy playing it.
One more question about when you started. Were you considered pretty crazy for doing this? Were the neighbors snickering and laughing?
Yeah, everybody thought I was crazy, and a lot of them were still right. But I went broke a couple of times doing it. They're the ones that probably kept me in longer than anybody else. The ones that said I couldn't do it, so I stayed in.
One of my favorite sayings is to ranch weird. Dan, what do you guys call it? I think rotational grazing is it's like crescent wrench. It just covers this wide variety of things. First, what do you guys call it?
I think that's a great question. I tend to think of it more as management intensive grazing that's focused on plant recovery and focused on flexibility. I think one of the challenges in our annual system, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, in a decent year come April, we get recovery in 15 days. And we're at a point now in our annual growing system where we're not going to have green grass probably till November at the earliest. And so the rest period right now is a whole lot different than it would be in April. And I think that flexibility requires some management intensity that is a little different than just turning sheep out and going to check them once in a while. I think we're trying to, even on small landscapes, trying to move across the landscape pretty quickly. I think the other issue that's complicated, and this is probably true of a lot of sheep operations in California, is that it's almost entirely on leased ground, or you're doing work for somebody that wants the fuel load reduced. And so their objectives are to grow no feed after May 1st, where we're trying to save some fall feed or think about where the sheep are going next. And I think that requires a great deal of flexibility operationally as well.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a theme here, and what I thought everybody was going to say is that water's the limiting factor. And so far, I've got a 66% rate of lease ground, makes this a lot harder. And you add Roger's situation of having those different classes of cattle, making it hard to just combine more and more. Would you say that's your biggest challenge? Particularly Roger and Dan, is the lease ground situation?
I think for me, the challenge that comes with lease ground is trying to do a job managing that ground where it's going to grow more feed and be more ecologically functional, not knowing if I'm going to get to reap that benefit next year. It's hard to explain to a landlord the benefits and the long-term view that we try to take as grazers with somebody who's looking, well, maybe cows can pay me more than sheep can pay me next year. Thanks for helping get this ranch back in shape.
Yeah, that is a tough one. Roger, would you say that's your biggest hang up, at least now, is that lease ground situation?
It's a mixed bag, actually, with the amount of landlords we have. There is quite a variation. And fortunately, we're blessed with some people that really have buy-in, especially some of our larger leases. So that is helpful. And I think having that buy-in, it gives us some degree of confidence. However, we've also learned that, no matter what you think somewhat confidence is, that can go away real quick. The one point we kind of normally have, if we can stockpile a good amount of forage, and especially if it's native forage, we can utilize that forage. So that's something we can do through the winter for the most part. Now, the high mountain ground, you're not going to be up there, but if it's on the lower ground where we don't get as much snow, we're certainly able to harvest whatever stockpile forage we get. With that in mind, we still always want a substantial buffer, because in case the next spring turns out dry, we may have to get all the way till, could even be the end of May before we really get enough forage growing that we can really count on anything that's new growth. And so the stockpile forage is huge.
You said something early on in your introduction. You said you try and graze year round. And I found myself doing the thing I hate to hear from other people. Well, that works where you're at, but not where I live. But you're talking about Montana. So I don't have that excuse. You're talking about grazing most of the year and only feeding through bad storms, maybe, or obviously year to year, it's got to depend. But do you budget your forage to go throughout the whole year?
We do. Around September, October, we kind of do a forage inventory. And at that point, we would love to have at least 6 months worth of standing forage available. And on a good year, we can have a year's worth of standing forage available at that point. But it's, we can only accomplish that with our mature cows. The young cattle do need more supplementation, more help during the winter. And we also will help if we're on introduced grasses, we'll feed normally a protein hay, high protein hay, to supplement that. But they're still getting most of their energy component through the grass. And then if we just get so much snow they can't get to it, we'll go ahead and feed through that. And typically, if it's a good storm, we'll put that feed out like a week worth at a time. And just, it's kind of a modified bale grazing, if you will, because we don't really know where we're going to be with them, but we're ready to put it wherever they are and put a week's worth or 3 days, kind of depending on what they're predicting weather-wise.
I have so many rabbit trails to go down, so I'm going to kind of rapid fire them at you. Do you put up your own hay?
No.
All purchased?
Yeah, yes. We've done a little bit on shares where if somebody puts it up and we get a share of it. I'm not too big of a fan of that. I like buying hay because then I buy exactly what I need. The quality and the quantity. And we also like to have a little extra buffer on that in the stock, that's stockpile baled forage because some years you need it. Sometimes we do that in the form of straw, old straw. Cattle find it pretty palatable.
You said something else that I know is going to perk up the ears of my crested wheat friends out here. You said you protein a little more on the introduced grasses as compared to the natives. What's the difference in protein you're seeing between those introduced versus the natives?
Well, brome grass or crested wheatgrass in the wintertime here, be lucky if it's 3 to 4%. It's extremely low protein. Timothy, kind of the same way. But some legumes, clovers, and that kind of stuff on irrigated ground can still maintain 6 to 8. And native range, there's plants out there that can still be 14. So huge difference. And we just watch the manure and supplement accordingly.
Okay, I'm gonna stop picking on you for a minute because I got so many more questions that we don't have time for. Emery, you said you doubled and tripled, and I assume you're talking about forage production. Oh, I'm glad I asked. Okay, the forage must have increased dramatically then to be able to run more numbers, I assume.
Yes, it has. And then we still have droughts where it decreases tremendously too. And we've been through 3 of them in the last 20 something years. And when you say that, you got to be careful because that doesn't necessarily mean your total gain is on total number of head, I guess is what you're trying to say. You're not going to gain, say we're gaining 250 pounds before, we're not going to gain 750 pounds the next time just because it got better. You got to add cattle to it to make it happen. And therein lies the problem that we're into right now. You cannot double your production on what these cattle cost right now and think you're going to live. And we're proving you can't. And so it ain't fun. When these cattle are costing what they're costing right now and you're trying to triple, double what you're doing, it ain't going to work. Because the wreck is coming. We all know it's coming, but you still got to use what you produced. You still got to use it. And there is where the question arises that I don't know what to do anymore.
So I wanted to get at animal performance and what you've seen in terms of animal performance. And tell me if I'm understanding this right. You may lose a little bit on your average daily gain, but you have more cattle, so your total pounds increased is still relatively the same or maybe even higher, but individual animal performance, you're saying you see a little bit of a decline.
Well, it won't improve. It's hard to explain and hard to understand. But just because it's rained 40 something inches this year doesn't mean you're going to increase your total production. And we're a living example of that right now. And so you have to figure out what you're going to do. That's therein comes the sheep. And we just didn't show up with the sheep quick enough.
So you brought up sheep, and I'll talk a little bit about sheep. Dan, what are you seeing in California regarding just the sheep market in general? They're obviously a great tool for land management. I think cows are too, but I can't buy cows right now just for land management.
I think the sheep business has shrunk to the extent that our market is a lot more volatile than the cattle market is. So our swings may be just as pronounced, but they happen a lot. As Emery described, last year fat lambs were $1.30, $1.40. They're up around $2 a pound right now in California, and they may be back down again. We're a little different in California in that we're a little counter-cyclical. We have a lot of fall-born lambs where most of the country is spring lambing. And so that makes our market a little bit different. But where we're seeing growth right now is in targeted grazing. That's where we're seeing flocks grow, whether it's fuel load reduction or solar grazing or things like that. And that's where we see a new generation getting into the business in California.
Yeah, this isn't a sheep podcast, so I don't want to keep harping on this, but I just have so many questions. Sheep versus goats in your context. I have a feeling in Texas it'd be a little bit different, but do sheep men not want to be goat men like cow men don't want to be sheep men?
I'm going to throw a friend under the bus here. Some of you may know Dave Daly, who taught at Chico State and was president of the California Cattlemen's Association. Dave is now in the sheep business, and I remind him of that every time I see him, that he's now a multi-species grazer. A lot of people doing targeted grazing have both species, but I think there's a lot of people looking at where they can make a profit and I think Emery makes a great point where you can have a diversity of impact on the ground. You can improve the ecological function much more quickly, it seems like.
I'd like to jump in right there. It's been amazing what I've seen, what the sheep have done to the quality of the ground that they've grazed on and how much they've improved that ground from one year to the next, and never expected it.
I hear that there is an invasive shrub problem or an invasive tree problem down there. Is sheep having a positive effect there?
Yes, and of course the goats are too. I mean, the goat deal in Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, even back into California, wherever you want to go, that they have an invasive species problem. The goats and the sheep, but I think maybe the goats are more improved because they turn them in for 2 to 3 weeks. They bring them in with some laborers and some dogs and some electric fence, and they take their problem away. And it's been amazing how all of a sudden they're a positive influence.
I'm going to put this to anybody who feels like jumping in, because this is not context specific. If we're using, I'm just going to say rotational grazing, however you want to define it, if we're using it to target species to eradicate them, like invasive brush, how can we be doing both? How can we positively affect the desirable species while negatively affecting those less desirable species? And
the way I've approached it is to think about where we are at a particular time of the year. Some parts of the year we're trying to manage for what we want there, by which I mean we're trying to favor the plants that can outcompete the invasives if we give them a shot. And in other times of the year, we're trying to manage against an invasive. I'll use 2 examples. In our foothill rangelands, we do have some remnant native perennial grasses here, purple needlegrass and California melic and a few others. And if we can graze those early and then get off of them when they go to seed, we can actually encourage expansion of those grasses in our system. by the same token, if we can wait to graze yellow star thistle until it's starting to bolt and just starting to flower, we can really reduce seed production. So that may happen on the same piece of ground. We may try to go through there early, top off the stuff that we want to encourage to spread, and then come back later after it's already gone to seed and really try to hit the invasives hard at a time when the invasives may have a little more nutritional quality than some of the grass species out there. But it's kind of a balancing act in our case, I think.
Yeah, I coming back same season, just later in the season to have a different effect. Dan, I didn't ask you. Did the neighbors in California think you were weird for doing this?
Yeah, that goes with the territory.
Yeah.
It is interesting because sheep are so mobile. You get to graze in some places where there's a lot more public attention, which I think comes with some good and bad to it as well. But in some cases, we're the first livestock people have ever seen in their neighborhood. And I think there's some benefit to that as well.
So this is going out to everybody, but I want to start with Emery because you live in a foreign country as far as I know. How do you measure ecological success? What is it you're out there measuring to say this year was a good year? We did a good job.
I guess the first thing you would say, we made money, and that's getting harder and harder to do. But that's what we're looking at right now. But at the same time, if you want to go back and look at your forage, we don't want to kill all our weeds. That's not what we're trying to do. We don't want to kill all the ragweed. Now, I wouldn't mind killing all the broomweed, but the ragweed and all those other beneficial weeds, we don't want to kill them. We want them to come back next year. We just don't want them to dominate all the other things, good things we have going on. And so when people say, well, you still got ragweed. Yeah, that's the first thing our steers graze the first day of April is to come in and graze ragweed. So I don't know whether I answered your question or not, but I'm not trying to kill every weed in the country. I'm just trying.
That's a really good point. I graze a lot of Russian knapweed, and I would rather have some of that western wheatgrass that's around it, but that Russian knapweed is 18% protein at the right time, and it's at a time when those other grasses are trying to grow. I'm not trying to kill it out.
We don't have any of that, but we have stuff that's comparable. We have not spent $1 on killing weeds since we've been here, and never will.
You brought up a really important point, and it's on me for not saying this from the get-go, but where good grazing makes sense, and if you're not in a profitable business, then any ecological sustainability doesn't matter to me if the next generation can't take it over. So I do want to address that. I assume that we are all talking about profitable operations, and I thank you for bringing that up.
Not when you're talking about me, but go ahead and you can give me credit for it.
Roger, read a little bit about your place, and you talk about soil. Are you measuring the soil any specific way, or are you looking at vegetation cover? How do you know at the end of the year you did a good job?
I guess maybe at the end of the year we really don't know for sure, but I think over time we've developed a little sense. So we do some basic soil testing, and the primary indicator for me is organic matter. If we can be increasing our organic matter, we're increasing our water holding capacity and our infiltration ability to capture and store precipitation. I think that's really the indicator, and the tests actually verify percent organic matter, but we really do, over time, we've developed a sense of whether we are or aren't increasing organic matter and decreasing bare ground. But like Emery, I mean, we darn sure want to see if we can make money. The other thing I think longer term is we do want to see more predators, more coyote, more fox, more mice. We want to see more of everything. And I think long term, maybe there's some indicators. We've had some beaver come back into some areas, and also sharp-tailed grouse come back that we sure didn't see 15 years ago. So I think those might be the better longer-term indicators. If they like it, I love it.
We just got beavers back at our home place here. Something's going right if they're coming back, and I tend to agree with you on that. Dan, you've got lots of different measurements, I'm sure. If you're doing targeted grazing for property owner A, might have some totally different objectives for C. So how are you measuring ecological success?
It's kind of all over the board to some degree with different landowners and different clientele. I guess what I look at is the diversity, both of the plant and the animal life on a place. I think the diversity of wildlife tells you kind of what you're doing with the primary productivity of a place, and I think that's important. I think the other thing that maybe is different about the way all of us approach these questions is that when we see something that somebody else might say is an undesirable plant, we see an opportunity. And I think rotational systems or management intensive systems kind of force you to think that way. That if you've got something that somebody else says is a weed and they don't want it here anymore, we see it as an opportunity to fit a particular niche in our operation at a certain time of year.
As usual, time's flying by. I'm really enjoying all the rabbit trails we're going down, and I'm reminded that the reason we're here is to talk about the number one hindrance to start these things. Emery, what's the number one challenge you see in starting a rotational grazing system? However you want to describe rotational. What's stopping people from doing it?
Labor.
Labor.
At my age, is killing us. My wife and I, she's fixing to be 74 and I'm 75, and it's killing us. And we can't find people that can do what we could do 20 years ago.
All right, so we got Emery. Emery says labor's the problem. Roger, what's the number one hindrance to adopting some sort of rotation, even if it's not a high intensity? Or
I think for people who haven't been exposed to it, of course, it could be like just about everything we talk about. It depends, but if people haven't been exposed to it, but if they have some curiosity, it's probably just the courage to take the first step. Is literally would be the very number one thing. And then once you've started it and you see the benefits of it, the next biggest thing that you're going to see is exactly what Emery's talking about. Is you're going to just wear yourself out. And we've bridged that gap a little bit with the Quivira Coalition and an apprenticeship program, but there's a real risk of burnout when it comes to teaching inexperienced people.
Or on the mentors or the mentees?
The mentors. I mean, there's a lot of benefits and a lot of positive interaction, but it still is a potential burnout thing where, of course, the people you get as apprentices makes a huge difference, but it only takes a couple of iffy ones to really make you wonder if that's the right choice, because it'll really stretch your patience. And then at the same time, while your patience is being stretched, that the job is not adequately being done. And so that's been a real hurdle. And I think we've refined that a little bit in our interview process and those kind of things, but you're never immune. But I think that still the overall tendency of people to not want to change. I've heard it described as the biggest challenge is a paddock between your ears.
Like that. I'm glad you brought it back to that. I want to ask this question. You started it. Neighbors are laughing. Did you get it right the first year? Was it a home run?
No, we still haven't. No,
yeah, right.
But we're still trying. I mean, we want to get a little better each time. That's kind of our.
And I might even assume that you maybe had some bad wrecks when you're first starting.
It's amazing how resilient these landscapes are, in spite of us, I guess, because what we thought were bad wrecks honestly turned out okay. But yeah,
I like that. I like that positivity, and I agree. I think just having the courage to ranch weird and do something different is one of the biggest hurdles I see in the industry. And what do you think? Biggest hurdle to starting to do this?
I was thinking about this all day, and I was thinking about infrastructure and water and labor and all those things that are easy to kind of wrap my brain around. But I think in the people that I work with, paradigms are the biggest impedance, biggest obstacle. If your paradigm is that this is too much work, the first wreck you have will confirm that it's too much work, and you'll go back to what you were doing. And I think that's a challenge that's more difficult to overcome than infrastructure or finding labor. I think it's as you said, Roger, between the ears is where that obstacle lies.
It never ceases to amaze me. The answer was supposed to be water and forage and fence and time and labor, and like everything I'm finding with ranching is it's people attitudes and paradigms, and I really like the way you said it. If you if you think this is going to be a challenge, the first rec will just confirm it. And Roger's sitting there, still alive somehow. Emery's doing it.
Right.
Everybody here survived it.
Yep.
But for those who are going to say, well, that's fine for Montana and California and Texas, it won't work at my place. Let's talk about some of those things that are a little easier to wrap your head around. And water is the first one for me. California, Texas, anybody feel free to jump in, but Montana might be a little more applicable to the water problem. Did you have any water issues in terms of infrastructure? How'd you get around things?
Our home place is extremely well watered, and we have irrigated land as well on that. So we used irrigation ditches and got through that. But cattle will do a lot of damage to irrigation ditches and stuff. So there's a big, pretty steep learning curve there, but it's doable. But otherwise, other places we've incorporated solar and pretty long lanes. Sometimes lanes that can be a half a mile long. Reach out a little further. That kind of stuff can compromise performance a little bit. And we've also done wintertime grazing where we just basically have a water source that we just keep moving forward, and they can go up to a mile away from that water source in strips, and they come back over the land we've grazed just because it's wintertime and everything froze. That's less than ideal, but it still gets that stockpile forage harvested. But it gets less and less effective the further you get from water. It's an issue.
One of the things that we noticed in our last big drought here was that there were a lot of cattle outfits that didn't use pastures because they didn't have water. They had the feed, but they didn't have stock water. And when we went out and talked to sheep producers, they were all equipped to haul water to livestock anyway. That's kind of how the sheep business works in California. And so water's not been a limiting factor. Maybe access to get a water wagon into a place might limit you. But even a lot of the open range outfits will herd the water once or twice a day and then go out and utilize feed a long way from that water source during the day.
I got too many rabbit trails on that, and it's time for me to get to the many questions that people have asked. From Jeff Goodwin, rain and record markets make ranching look easy. How do you all prepare for the next drought and the next market downturn?
I'm always looking at costs. The market I can't control, but costs to some degree I can control. And that's one of the things that we've always looked at. In terms of drought, having a plan in place, knowing where we would take animals if it didn't rain on the country we've been typically grazing, trying not to destock more than access ground that hasn't been grazed in some time, kind of stockpiling feed seasonally. For us, it's fall feed. We want to stockpile some feed going into the fall, but making sure we've got some standing forage. Cheaper to take sheep to the feed than it is to harvest feed and take it to the sheep.
Would a drought cause a change in your rotational management? If you're maybe a few months into what's looking like we might be heading into maybe a longer term drought, would that change how fast you're rotating? What would change in your operation?
Personally, I think it's time to start backing off your numbers. And at the same time, you got the screwworm deal coming at you. And if they don't get it stopped, they're going to decrease your numbers. And it might be time to take your money and run for a while, is what I'm thinking. And
I agree. I call it a strategic culling plan.
Is extremely scary.
Yeah, I imagine, especially in your part of the world with what's going on. Roger, yeah. How would an impending drought affect your management decisions, short term and long term?
Yeah, our thoughts with seed stock, we kind of hate the idea of thinking about that, but we do have to. And I think it's kind of an all of the above. But it's probably part of the reason that we try to have an excess of forage tied up in the form of leases and things so that we do have a substantial buffer. That allows us kind of a first take on that. The next level of that, we keep our bulls over, and so those bulls could go to a feed yard somewhere. We could lock some cattle up. We could lock our yearling heifers up and maintain our cow herd, maybe, depending on the severity of it. But the idea of destocking, reducing numbers is one thing, but totally destocking probably isn't really on our radar. We also do have, though, a fair amount of irrigated ground that could buy us some time as well. So it's a mixed bag. I don't know I think the biggest thing we see is that if we keep a big enough buffer of stockpile feed on the front end, that we've been able to get through some pretty dry times that way. But I think the bigger thing probably than that is our overall strategy of low inputs and a type of cow that can survive. You know, you might suffer a lower breed up and stuff, but you come out the other side fairly intact. I think the other thing, though, strategically, from our perspective, we're sure not going to be making improvements and spending money that we don't need to during a drought.
Yeah, I'll kind of chalk that up, that more efficient animal, to what Dan was saying about watching costs. I don't need to have the biggest wean calves. I want the efficient cow that's going to survive these kind of things. So we're wrapping up here. Any final thoughts from the panel geared towards the person who's thinking about doing this? Also, specifically, what are the biggest mistakes you've seen when other people try to start this? And maybe kind of the same question, what are the biggest misconceptions about any kind of rotational grazing? That was a lot to put at you for final thoughts, so feel free to wander.
I think somebody already said it. It's not a calendar, right? It's looking at what's going on around you. You don't open up the calendar and say, well, it's August 8th. It's time to move to pasture Y tomorrow, because that's when I always do it. And I think that's where I see people getting wrecks in California, is that they're on this strict rotation where they move every 25 days, whether they need to or not. And pretty soon nothing's working for them.
Yeah. So what are you watching instead of the calendar?
The grass, the forage, the water availability, soil conditions, soil moisture in the springtime. If we have no soil moisture, I know doesn't matter how much I move, I'm not going to get regrowth. Whereas if we've got good soil moisture, I need to plan to come back to that area more quickly.
Emery, what's the I'm gonna put the same question to you. What's the biggest misconceptions out there and the biggest mistakes you've seen when people start this, any kind of rotational system?
Just go by the rule book. I said before, but you got to see what's happening. The moisture in the ground, the grass is growing, what your cattle are doing. And when all those things are going negative, it's time to do something else. And that means get rid of cattle. And we see that everybody wants to keep saying it's going to rain. It may not rain. And it will rain someday, but you may not be here when it does. And so you've got to pay attention to those signs and signals that it's what this is telling you to do. And it's the same thing as the market. It's a hard thing to do, but you got to sell some good cows once in a while. And you got to hedge your cattle and you got to stay out in front of it. And it's telling you what to do. You just got to live with the signs.
What I heard from both of you is being adaptive and being observant, not going by the rule. But Roger, you have anything to add to those?
No, I agree with that. All that. I do think probably the biggest mistake I've seen is I've seen people go in too big a way, and the education curve is so steep they can't stand it. So I think start at a level you can afford to fail, and that you kind of know you can. I think that if you're just starting in, I think that would be my key suggestion. That's what we did. We did a little bit and learned a lot, and I think that's a good way to approach it. And then even in spite of that, try to keep a mentality that you are gonna persist in spite of the failures. But doing it at a small scale makes that a lot easier than having it be a big wreck.
I really like that. Start at a level you can afford to fail. I feel like that's where we should end this whole thing. Start at a place you can afford to fail. Well, guys, I really appreciate you being here. Roger, you have a sale coming up you want to tell people about?
Oh, absolutely. If you're giving me an opportunity to do a plug, the 8th of December, we have a bull and female sale. 18-month-old forage-based bulls, low input cattle. Give us a call, go to our website, and Hindrance Angus, absolutely appreciate that. And thanks for having us.
Dan, Emery, anything you guys want to plug, any projects you're working on or you want people to check out?
Glad to meet all of y'all. Appreciate it. So enjoyed y'all.
Thanks, Emery. Dan, you got anything you want to send people to?
Just appreciate being asked and really great conversation. I learned a lot tonight. Thank you.
Same here. I look forward to meeting you guys more often in person. So as we wrap up, I didn't hear much about water. I didn't hear much about fencing. I didn't hear anything about regulations, which is I could get on for a little while, but I'll save that for a different one. We heard labor is an issue, but the biggest thing was that space between your ears. What'd you call it? The pasture between your ears? Yeah, having the courage to get started on something. Who'd have guessed? Thanks, everybody.